All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth video in our series about budgetary policy for Unit 4, Area Study 1, Area Demand Side Policies in VCE Economics. Today we're going to be talking about automatic and discretionary stabilizers that are built into the government's federal budget. We're going to be talking about how they affect the overall budget outcome, how they either make us move more towards a deficit or more towards a surplus. Automatic stabilizers is an area where students often find it to be a little bit complicated or confusing overall, so we'll try and spend a little bit of time diving into that to try and make it make as much sense as humanly possible. So when we look at the all-mate study design here, it is going to be these two dot points that we're looking at. So the role of automatic stabilizers and the role of automatic stabilizers and discretionary stabilizers. Automatic stabilizers are all about the aggregate demand side, so cyclical component, just how things fluctuate with economic activity, whereas discretionary are structural, they're basically deliberate decisions made by the government. So automatic stabilizers. These are the tax change revenues collected and welfare outlays that are built into the budget and operate correctly in a counter-cyclical way to help stabilize aggregate demand without the federal treasurer deliberately changing their level or announcing new policies. So this includes most types of tax, pay-as-you-go tax, company tax, capital gains tax, GST, and excise, as well as expenses including some welfare benefits. I'm betting after that sentence you're like, what are you even saying? There is nothing there that are words that sound like English to me. So we're going to talk about, remember how we had the business cycle? This is not a bad business cycle that I'm drawing. All right, so you know how when we're moving up the business cycle, we're starting to have things like lower rates of unemployment, higher rates of economic growth. How automatic stabilizers work is as we are increasing in our economic activity, people are becoming more employed, we're having more growth. So overall, people are starting to pay more tax through both incomes and companies paying more tax. And then at the same time, less people are unemployed, so we are paying less welfare at the same time. So automatically, without the government doing anything, because economic activity is increasing, there is more tax paid, so more tax, and less welfare outlays. And so that automatically happens. So less welfare. And then what's going to happen is eventually this is going to make us slowly get closer to a surplus because the government is increasing the amount of revenue they receive and decreasing their amount of outlays. So automatically we're starting to get closer to that budget surplus or reduced deficit overall. That's an important point to make. Say for example now, when you're doing the end of year exam, because we're currently going to be in a deficit, you've got to be really careful to say when you talk about the government getting more revenue in, that it's either moving us towards a surplus or a reduced deficit. In most cases, it's a reduced deficit. So we look at how automatic stabilizers work on the other direction. So if we are moving down into a contraction, moving down that business cycle, well, what happens? One of the first things that happen when we start to slow down with our economic activity is that businesses start laying off workers. As businesses lay off workers, suddenly they don't have an income. They're not paying anywhere near as much income tax because they don't have an income. They're paying no income tax. And then at the same time, they move from having an income to receiving welfare. So when we're in a contraction, automatically people start paying less tax, the government receives less revenue through tax, and they start having to pay more in outlays through welfare, etc. And this automatically leads us to go more towards a reduced surplus or an increased deficit. And the reason these work is why we call them counter-cyclical, is that they're built in because they're trying to stabilize the level of economic activity. Hopefully you remember that when we talked about the business cycle, is the overall aim is to try and get it to be as flat as possible to minimize those peaks and troughs. So try and get it as close to that long-term trend line as possible. And so by having these automatically built in, it helps stabilize economic activity without the government having to do anything. And that's really good because the government only makes their announcements in May each year. And a whole lot of things can go crazy with the economy between then. Fair enough, the government can make small little changes along the way, introduce mini budgets throughout the year if they need to. But for the most part, automatic stabilizers do this work to maintain and manage the level of economic activity automatically without the government having to do anything. So say, for example, when we get to a peak and inflation starts to get really high, etc., automatically people are paying more taxes. It's forcing them to slow down, and it can help try and bring inflation back into that target range without the government having to do things like increase the tax rate. So that's automatic stabilizers. These happen automatically without government intervention. So for example, when there's an increase in economic activity, moving towards a boom, personal incomes, company profits, and the sales of goods and services are increasing, which means the government will be getting more tax revenue in line with progressive tax system and GST. At the same time, because unemployment is lower, the government doesn't need to spend as much on outlays such as welfare. Thus, the automatic stabilizers ensure that a contractionary stance is adopted, so revenue increases faster than outlays, resulting in a reduced deficit from the previous year or an increased surplus from the previous year. So it raises leakages through taxation relative to injections, which is government spending. So we've got discretionary stabilizers. These are the deliberate changes in tax rates and the tax mix and the direction and composition of budget outlays, specifically announced by the Treasurer to steady economic activity in response to development. So these are the things, the changes announced in the May budget that are going to effectively be changing the structure of the economy through various things. So for example, tax cuts to promote expansionary consumption spending and business expansion. So we've had cuts to the small business tax rate to 27.5%, down from 30% a few years ago. We've had a few years ago a tax cut for middle income earners, which is also considered expansionary. They increased the middle income bracket so that more people fit into that bracket, so less people are paying higher tax rates. We've had in the last two budgets, the last 2 years, people getting that the $1,080 tax offset, so they pay less tax and get more tax back on their tax return. These are discretionary stabilizers that are designed to stimulate the economy and are done deliberately by the government. So discretionary stabilizers are anything the government does to try and change economic activity through the budget. So when they announce infrastructure spending, that's a discretionary stabilizer. They're trying to stimulate the economy. When they announce cutting of funding to certain areas, they're trying to slow things down, and that's a discretionary stabilizer. So any deliberate changes, any deliberate policy changes by the government are a discretionary stabilizer. Then we've got a few random little points here. So fiscal drag or bracket creep. So this can occur during times of inflation for countries with a progressive tax system. As we were talking about before, tax systems in brackets. So the first one being up to $18,200. Then it goes up to about $55,000. And then so on above that, you pay a different percentage of tax. When inflation occurs, it results in a decrease in real wages, and workers seek to protect their real wage by seeking increases in their nominal wage. So people try and get their wages increased to try and better off their living standards. But often as nominal wages increase, it pushes some workers into higher marginal tax brackets. So sometimes it's a really weird system that works sometimes. Sometimes say, for example, let's say with the middle income bracket, it goes up to $88,000. Say you earn $87,000 right now. For some people, if they get a promotion or an increase in pay rate, they'll move up to the next income bracket, pay a higher rate of income tax, and actually earn less on a weekly basis than they were before. And that can really disadvantage some people and mean that some people don't want to actually earn more. And then lastly, we've got the impact of unexpected events on the final budget outcome. So when the budget's announced each year, it's simply an expectation of the budget outcome. It's saying what they plan to do for the whole year. And as you know, in 12 months, a lot can change. I'm sure all of you change a lot each 12 months. And if you look at yourself 12 months ago, you'll be like, whoa, that's not who I am now. The budget's the same. The budget, they set it, it's goals, it's planning, and many things throughout the year can change that. So some unexpected events such as weaker than expected economic growth and inflation or rising employment can lead to the budget not actually hitting the surplus that they might announce happening right now. Lower commodity prices in terms of trade can hurt our overall budget outcome. Reduced business profits, natural disasters, ongoing uncertainties in the world, e.g. pandemic, and recessions in parts of Europe and a slowdown in China. Basically all of those, this list I made a few years ago, but this list right now, that list there, describes Australia right now, which is kind of terrifying. So you can kind of see why, although the budget estimate was $7.1 billion of surplus, we are not going to be anywhere near that. It's going to be, I think, I recall them saying it's going to be one of the biggest deficits in history for Australia due to the bushfires and the pandemic, which is kind of just mind-blowing in a way that things can change that quickly thanks to a global pandemic. So these sudden unexpected events can actually lead, well, the government's got to do something to stop the economy from just going into free fall. And so by doing this, they usually have to spend more money to try and stimulate things, keep things operating smoothly, and that can lead to a budget deficit occurring. So the budget outcome can change throughout the year, and so you'll often get the projected budget outcome and then the real budget outcome, which is going to be very different. Sometimes it's pretty close, but most of the time it ends up being a little bit different. For the last probably, I want to say 4 years, it's been a surplus that they've announced and it's ended up being a deficit, and there's always been reasons for that. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions at all about these, because I know they are confusing topics, feel free to send me a message or email or get in contact with me any way that you want. Other than that, I hope you have an excellent day. Next up, we'll be looking at the very last part, which is strengths and weaknesses of budgetary policy for achieving the domestic macroeconomic goals. It's pretty general, won't take too long overall. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you next time. Goodbye.